I first met John as a stand-up comic. And then somewhere in the process of knowing him, I discovered that he has a wide and ranging and fascinating background with Star Trek, editing numerous Star Trek novels, including one of my personal favorites, The Captain's Daughter, which is a novel that is near and dear to my heart, as I have explained to John, and knows the author, Peter David, who is a writer that I revere. He's worked with a lot of amazing people, and he's also written a couple of episodes of Deep Space Nine, which is just, incredibly cool, and is a font of information, and much of it about Star Trek. So that's why I thought he'd be a great first guest.
Yeah, well, that's so awesome. I mean, already he makes me feel like I don't know anything. That's Thank you so much for being with us, John.
John, what was your first Star Trek? What was your first introduction to the Star Trek franchise?
So my first introduction was watching the reruns on over and over, the 3 seasons that existed over and over forever. Hit my first Star Trek convention in the mid-'70s. I think it was like the second one there ever was.
Oh, wow.
It was actually advertised on TV during the Star Trek reruns for about 5 seconds. And I'm like, holy crap, this is a Star Trek convention. Other people like this show? So, that was my first experience. Original series, man, all the way.
How many people were there at that first convention?
I believe between 10 and 15,000.
Oh, wow.
Do you remember what first drew you to Star Trek?
Well, I'd always been a science fiction fan. So, hey, look, there's a science fiction show on TV. Well, the line I've used for years is, I found Star Trek at a time in my life when other people find religion. I guess what I liked about it most was the differing tones from episode to episode. You could go from Doomsday Machine to Trouble with Tribbles. You could go from Shore Leave to Amok Time. The stories were very different. We think of original series as being very moralistic in its presentation, and it certainly does have a good chunk of episodes like that. But some are straight action adventure. Remember, I was 7 or 8, and I just loved it.
Who's your favorite character?
It's so easy to say Kirk, but that's pretty much the reality. It is. You never forget your first Star Trek. Kirk's ability to outthink things, although we think of Spock as the intellectual one, Kirk is the one who really outthought, say, the Romulan commander. And his ability to do that was very appealing.
Absolutely. Yeah. He does a poker move and the Corbomite maneuver,
Right, exactly.
Did you ever have the opportunity to meet any of your heroes from Star Trek?
Oh, absolutely. One of my best memories is actually having lunch with William Shatner.
Oh.
Where did you guys go for lunch?
I don't remember the exact name. It was this semi-fancy Chinese place because it was on the company, so we didn't care. I'm sitting there with him, and the reality is, in real life, he's an old Jewish actor. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a Jewish New Yorker. He's Jewish from Toronto, and we just meshed perfectly well on that level. But he had to say, excuse me just a second. He pulled out, and this was the flip phone era. He pulled out a flip phone, and he went exactly the same motion. Push the button on it. And he said, did we get that thing done yet? Okay, because it was supposed, how much longer? Yeah, we need to have that done. Okay, that's it. Click. And it's like, oh my God, for this one moment, I wasn't having lunch with a very pleasant and friendly old Jewish actor. I was having lunch with Captain Kirk. And I met Nimoy when we did the audiobook version of the Vulcan's Forge book. And he said, so John, tell me what this book is about. And I said, well, it's basically about why Spock left. This was after unification. Why Spock left Starfleet. And Nimoy said, why did Spock leave Starfleet? And I said, well, and he said, no, never mind. I'll read it. I'll just read it. I'll read it.
So you actually explained to Leonard Nimoy something that was going to happen in Spock's transitional period.
Yes. Basically, one of the things we did at the novels is we tried to fill in the blanks that they would leave. So in Unification, Spock shows up as an ambassador. Well, why did he decide to become an ambassador as opposed to just staying in Starfleet? So we did a book about that. And George Takei, I went out with my boss and George Takei. On the way to lunch, he said, so which way do we go for this restaurant? I said, you're the navigator, you should know. Right? And he bursts out laughing. My boss gives me these, oh my God, how could you talk to him that way eyes? And then he mentioned that when he was a starving actor, he would just sit on the steps of the New York City Library building and, eat his lunch and read a book or something. And I said, you know what you were doing there, George? You were reading Between the Lions. And once again, my boss daggers. I have a very embarrassing story about me that includes Marina Sirtis.
Love to hear it.
Go for it.
Okay.
Please tell us.
I'm a guest at a Star Trek convention. And I'm just sitting around the lobby talking with fans and other pros. And then a woman walks in a tight red dress, very low cleavage, hair pulled back, very high stiletto heels. I just look that way and I say, wow, that hooker has walked into the wrong convention.
Oh.
And one of the fans turns to me and said, that's Marina Sirtis. And I said, I never said it. I never said it. That never happened. They said, yes, John, that never happened. And so I'll say to you and everyone listening, that never happened.
Only you could go back in time and just erase that. Did you meet any of the actors from the episodes that you wrote?
I did chat with, back then his name was different, but he's now Alexander Siddig, about Starship Down. And he said, John, because of your episode, I had to spend 3 days snuggling with Terry Farrell in an elevator. Write another. The frustrating thing about that I find about Star Trek, and I'm not here to, obviously I love Star Trek. I'm not here to trash it. But it gives us this wonderful future, but it doesn't tell us how to get there.
Well, there are certain things that it says in terms of us sort of curing hunger and working together as one planet, but we're nowhere near that.
We have to have World War III first, right? Isn't that a very big part of the timeline?
That's not in my head canon. No. They specifically said in original series that we avoided that.
They do seem to have escaped the carnage of your first 3 world wars, Doctor.
They have slavery, gladiatorial games, despotism.
Situations quite familiar to the 6 million who died in your First World War, the 11 million who died in your second, the 37 million who died in your third. Shall I go on?
And the fact that Brannon Braga wanted to do it in a movie doesn't change that for me.
Okay, fair enough.
Energy sufficiency is the major push of Star Trek. There never seems to be a shortage on energy, except when Kirk is in the middle of a battle and he needs more power.
Well, you gotta get power from the deflectors somehow.
Yes. Although there were a couple of episodes, I gotta say, where Scotty said, Captain, if we keep doing we cannot maintain warp 8, and Kirk would go, okay, drop down to warp 6. And it's like he'd be very frustrated, but he'd do it. We worked into a book that was primarily focused on the Klingons. We put in this little just throwaway bit where a Klingon engineer says to the Klingon captain, sir, if I give you more power, the ship was going to explode. And he says, damn it, I need that power anyway. And the guy says, yes, sir. And the ship blows up. It's like, I told him.
How do you learn how to write the technobabble stuff? Maybe in the Jeffries tube, and I'll reroute power to the couplings. Is there a manual for that stuff?
Well, in the original series, they tried to keep that at an absolute minimum. In TNG, they would throw out a lot of that stuff. But in the raw script for a TNG episode, it would just say tech and or technobabble. I mean,
wow,
it really said technobabble.
Wow.
And then Mike Akuda or someone would come in and write something in, or Andre Barmanis would just write in something that sounded good. In TOS, they didn't use that kind of term very much. They would say, we need an intermix formula, and that was it. But it's easy. Brent Spiner summed it up like this. It's like Shakespeare. You don't have to know what it means. You just have to say it with the right rhythm.
And then us nerds are trying to figure out what it means and try to analyze it.
I pulled this on LeVar Burton at a convention. He didn't know who I was or anything. I stood up and I raised my hand, and he eventually called at me. And I said, when you're going from warp 4 to warp 6 in a tachyon field, how do you adjust the inertial dampener? And it was a huge laugh from the audience. And then LeVar Burton said, this is something you have to understand. LeVar Burton does not understand a word Geordi says. Then afterwards, I had a meeting with him. He said, why did you ask me that question? That total geek question. I said, because I figured you'd have a good answer. And a prepared answer, and you did. And he said, okay, well, that works.
With writing for Deep Space Nine, there's the additional aspect of staying within the story, because it's a serial show much more so than the other Star Treks before. Discovery and Picard are like that, but the other shows before weren't as serial as Deep Space Nine. Did you choose what you were going to write, or did they tell you when you wrote around it?
Let me tell you a bit of the history of It's Only a Paper Moon. We pitched it about 4 years before you saw it. We did not pitch it as Nog's leg gets blown off, so he goes into the holodeck and won't come out. We pitched it as a Cheers episode with a bar fight. One of the ways you can do well in television is to pitch the cheapest thing you can think of, because the producers want to save production money for their big special effects blowout multiple set episodes. If you look at Starship Down, it's actually a bottle show. There's no new set. We saved them a ton of money. That's why we could do some cool special effects in it. But so we pitched, there's a holiday that shuts down everything on the station except Quark's bar because, of course, Quark doesn't close for holiday. So everyone on the station was there, including visiting Klingons and an alien race we made up, but I forget. Quark was trying to sell a Klingon artifact to the new alien race. If you'll notice, this sounds nothing like what we eventually wound up with.
No.
And the idea was that we basically have everybody in the station come through. Garak and Bashir are playing chess. Eventually, everybody winds up at Quark's. It's basically a sitcom episode.
Like a Jewish Christmas.
Yes. And then eventually, the fact that Quark is trying to sell this artifact gets out and a huge fight breaks out. And it's basically like the scene from Trouble with Tribbles, where Bashir picks up the chessboard, the 3D chessboard, and then has to maneuver his way through the fight and out the door without the chess. But over the 4 years, they kept coming back to that idea of saving money. So they kept calling us up and saying, we're thinking of going in this direction. Do you have any ideas for it? And we would kick it back and forth and nothing would happen. And then in the last season, I get a call from Ron Moore saying, we're buying the episode. I was like, great. And the way it works is once they've settled on the storyline, they tell the author exactly what the storyline is. You type it up and then you send it back to them and they formally buy it. Okay. Before it was just a pitch. So he's telling me the story and saying, well, that's good. That's really good. That's really fun. Here's a suggestion. Okay. I like that. Put that in. Blah, 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 blah. Then he says, and then we find out why Quark won't leave the holosuite. And I said, okay. So why won't Quark leave the holosuite? And he said, I don't know, John, it's your story. Mm-hmm. So we came up with the idea that he won't leave because the moment he leaves, his friends are going to make him go fight in a war again. And he'd lost that teenage sense of invulnerability because he'd had his leg blown off. And to this day, it's the episode that we hear the most about. But that's the process. It's a very collaborative, very back and forth. We have plenty of time to work on this until we don't kind of situation. That's how TV works. No matter whose name is on the screen, you never really know who wrote what, but you know who gets the checks. And that's the important part.
My next question, which you answered partially, is what advice would you give to a writer who wants to break into writing for Star Trek or other science fiction television?
I would say go to film school and have a roommate who's more successful than you are.
Is that what you did?
If you trace back the history of people who broke into television, it's really that. I mean, that wasn't true for me. I just happened to be working for Star Trek in one aspect, so I asked to pitch and they said, yeah. But that's the easiest route in. The other way is to write and write and write and write and write a very good script for some existing show or even an archaic show. I mean, it doesn't matter. A show that went off the air last year. Write a great script for it. Get yourself an agent and go from there because they won't let you in without an agent.
You got in because you were already working there?
I wasn't working in Hollywood. I was working in New York, but the cooperation level I established between us and the production staff was on such a high level that I said, hey, would you mind if I pitched? The first thing we pitched was TNG with Jerry Taylor, and she bought a pitch, but then Michael Piller came back and they didn't produce it. Oh, no, that was Voyager. And that was, again, very simple. The whole episode takes place, it's basically, we stole it from a MASH episode. The whole episode takes place in sickbay. While the ship is under attack, wounded are being brought in and taken out. The doctor has to manifest multiple versions of himself to keep things going. Here's me on writing. You don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what? I've decided I want to be a concert pianist. So I listen to a lot of piano music. So I should be able to do this. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way. And it doesn't work that way with writing either. Writing is like any other performing art. You have to practice and practice and practice and practice. That's the only way to get better. You know this from comedy. Without hitting a few open mics, a few dozen open mics to practice. You know, no one's going to discover you because you think you're funny in your living room and you've never written a joke or told it on stage.
Very true. Very, very true.
Writing is just another performative art and you've got to practice. I would say for science fiction, the last remaining short story magazines are the science fiction magazines. And they'll take submissions from anyone, buy them, read them, write and submit stories. Hopefully, eventually you'll sell one. That's what I did.
Oh, you wrote for like Asimov or places like that?
The first place I sold a story was a magazine in paperback form called New Destinies. And then after that, I sold one to Amazing Stories, then went to Weird Tales, and then on and on. But I had always really wanted to be an editor. So I basically used the short story credits to get an editing job. So, you know, sort of like, why should we hire you? And the answer is I've already sold 4 stories. I know what I'm doing. So the more you can get a track record. Oh, and the important thing to understand is, other than pitch cheap, it's don't go in with the idea that you're going to be correcting a mistake they've been making in the show.
I'm sorry, say that again. Don't go in there.
Go in with the idea of, you know, the character Jim Smith, right? They've been doing him all wrong. I'm going to go in there and show them how he should be done correctly. Don't try and fix anything. if they didn't like it the way it was, they would change it themselves. You're supposed to show that you need to come up with a story that they couldn't think of themselves. I mean, we sold Starship Down because my writing partner said to me, I really wish there was a way to do Das Boot on Deep Space Nine. And I said, there is. Let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we pitch it, and Ira Bear says, I've been trying to figure out a way to do Das Boot on Deep Space Nine, but I haven't been able to come up with anything. And you just handed it to me. Of course I'm going to buy it. So there's a tremendous luck factor. But don't go in with the idea that you're smarter than them. If you were smarter than them, they'd be working for you. Have something that'll make their job easier or cheaper, or give them something that'll be really fun to do. I mean, the guy who sold Our Man Bashir was basically having lunch with, he actually worked there. He was having lunch, but in like sweeping up or production or something, some low-level job. And he was just sitting with them and said, I'm a big fan of the In Like Flint movie. Is there some way that we can do with that, like Bashir? And they said, that would be hilarious. Let's do that. And they bought it. Part of it is if you want to work in any industry, get yourself into that industry in any way you can. If you want to be an actor, get a job at a theater sweeping up and they'll let you audition. It's very much like any other work environment. Think of it as a job interview. You go in there and you're trying to show them that you can do a good job, you can be very professional, and you can come up with something that's easy for them to do, that makes their life easier, and that they didn't think of on their own yet. And that's basically about it. Just accept that that's what it is. It's a job interview.
That's really good advice, especially with starting from just get lucky with your roommate. There are things you can do.
Just so you know, to sell 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine, we did 110 pitches among multiple shows to sell 2 episodes.
110?
110.
Oh, wow.
And that's actually considered a pretty high hit rate.
You came up with 110 different ideas?
Yeah, between Voyager and Deep Space Nine.
Oh, wow.
And TNG. Well, first of all, it's not that hard if you have no compunctions about lifting a famous story, or if you're not trying to reinvent the TV concept, just do a TV concept, it becomes much easier. If you start from an angle that's different from, I wonder what the best story I can tell is, you'll find yourself telling a very good story. A TV episode is not a small movie. A TV episode is theater done on sets that happens to be filmed, especially a science fiction show where it's not like SVU where they can go take a walk on the street. If you have to make notes, okay, they have established, they have an engineering set, they have a bridge set, they have a medical bay. What are the 7 or 8 sets that they actually have? I'm going to assume that's a theater and that they have those sets, and I'm going to tell a story set in that theater. I mean, this is why every TV show eventually winds up doing a show where everybody's trapped in the main set. Even ER wound up doing Breakfast Club. Somehow everybody had to take the same professional standards class, so they spent the whole episode sitting in this one classroom. Why? Cheap. Yep. But that kind of limitation doesn't hurt storytelling. It helps storytelling.
What Star Trek race would you be other than human?
I really like the idea of no one being able to look at me without going insane. So the one from the original series episode where the alien was in a box.
You're such a New Yorker.
Yeah.
What Star Trek creature would you most want as a pet?
A Horta. One of the first Deep Space Nine novels I edited, I felt like the show was the show and the novels were drifting away from feeling like they took place in the Star Trek universe. So I called up a very good horror writer friend of mine, Greg Cox, and said, hey, Greg, I want a bunch of baby Hortas eating Deep Space Nine. And he said, I can do that. And I said, I know, that's why I called you. And that was called Devil in the Sky. And it was great fun. So Horta, definitely Horta.
What Star Trek doctor do you think could tackle COVID?
All of them. For God's sakes, in Star Trek 4, McCoy gives a woman a pill and she grows into a kidney. I don't think COVID would be much of a problem. All in all, though, I would think the medical hologram, because they would be least likely to transmit it from person to person.
What device from Star Trek would you most want to have?
What device? I think all in all, the transporter, because I'm a remarkably lazy person. And it would be really nice to be able to go from one place to another without having to cover the ground in between.
About the Paper Moon episode, it was the first time that Star Trek had actually had a character go through something trauma that was long term and
Captain Pike.
I guess that's true, but we weren't there for that.
Right.
We got the aftershock of that.
Right.
Were you guys aware of that at the time, that you were doing something new, putting the character through something that was going to be radical in a sense?
Yes, in that sense, yes. But here's the concern I've always had. It seems fortunately limited to me. Quark is upset because his leg was blown off and they put on a perfect life duplicate of his leg. Now, in our world, there are people whose legs have been blown off who don't get a snap-on new leg. And I'm really worried about the idea that to them, their reaction would be, well, what is he so upset about? They just snapped on another leg. I can't get another leg. Why are they getting another leg? Do I want to watch this? But it turns out that I was afraid of nothing. That everyone's reaction was completely, that's exactly how I felt. I didn't want to go back in the world. And the fact that Quark had gotten his leg back, it was almost, they said, well, that's sort of the point. You can, even if you can heal all my physical injuries, I'm not healed. And okay, I was overly sensitive in that case. And I'm glad I was, and I'm glad we were reaching out to people who had been through that sort of stuff and that they identified with it, and rather than feeling the way I was afraid they might feel.
John, thank you so much for coming on. This was really fascinating and terrific, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Where else can people see you?
I'm going to be at the Broadway Comedy Club, 9 p.m. show, May 8th. And if you buy your tickets online and use the code Ordover, you'll save $10. All I have to be is hilarious. How hard can that be? Tomorrow, I'm going to go to Carnegie Hall and be a concert pianist.
Not in this economy.
Yeah, no.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was really an honor to meet you and getting to know all you know about Star Trek, which makes me feel like I know nothing.
All I could say is I love being here, and I absolutely adore that there are like 27 new Star Treks coming on. Oh, let me leave you with this. This is absolutely true. I went to high school with Michelle Hurd, who plays Rafi on Star Trek Picard. And I was a big Star Trek fan. And she once made fun of me for wearing a Star Trek uniform to school. So I now make fun of her for wearing one to work.
Love it. Thank you for watching the Prime-Time Directive. This has been John Ordover. I have been Bret Singer, joined by Sharon Simon and Jesse Reyes. Please come back. We'll be here. Live long and prosper.